Okay, let's get started. Welcome to our first webinar about build or buy your authentication solution. So today's webinar is about the following topics. I will first tell you what the goal is and how you can make a decision, what identity and access management is and why it is important. Then we head over to the decision factors about build or buy your authentication solution. And then we will see the pros and cons of building versus buying. And at the end, we do a Q&A session. And here I also want to welcome Jason. This is our account executive. He will handle the Q&A session. And if you have questions during the webinar, just drop them in. We will get to how you can do that. So first about me, my name is Fabienne. I'm a co-founder and Chief Product Officer at Zitadel, and I have been a software engineer previously, so I switched to product management about 3 years ago. Basically, we were a lot of engineers when we started, and as we started growing, we saw the need for more business side, so I changed to product management. Quick organizational part to let you know how you can ask your questions. If you do have any, just drop them in during the presentation. You can go to the bottom right in the Google Meet. There is a icon of some forms. Then you should see a Q&A and then just drop your questions, whatever you want to ask. Okay, let's start. So what I want to tell you in the webinar today is about what do you need to be able to make your decision. So there is no golden rule to whether you should buy or build your own authentication solution, but it is really essential that you have a look at your business requirement, the ones that you have currently, as well as your future ones. We will get to that also during the presentation. It is really important that you know what you want to have. And based on that, you can do your decision. Of course, we also have a general recommendation. We normally say, let pros handle your security so you can focus on what you are doing best. So you do have your business, and our business is security and identity and access management. So we are the experts in that topic. So we should tell you that the easiest way is that you handle your business requirements and we focus on what we can do best. What is identity and access management? What we hear a lot is, this is so simple, it's only 2 input fields and a button. What this means is 2 input fields, you have a username, you have a password, and you have a login button, and that's it. And yes, to some point, I absolutely agree. This is probably where you start. You only want the username, you want the password, and then you're fine. And that's an easy start. But if you have a closer look at what you really need with identity and access management, there's a lot more to it. First, there is the user management part. You probably do have different users like employees, customers. You maybe also have some machine accounts, and all of those do have different needs and informations. So you do want to make sure to manage them properly. The second part is the authentication. We already heard the password, and yes, that's one of the authentication methods, but there are a lot more than that. Some examples are multi-factor, magic links, passkeys, and social logins. And I'm pretty sure in the future we will have some more authentication methods for different users, as this is also constantly evolving, and with new security standards, there will be added more methods in the future. Also, there are some standards which are implemented in authentication, some like OIDC or SAML, which just makes it easier for integration. So it is helpful if you rely on those standards. Next part is the authorization part. So you already have defined your user, you have defined what they need to be able to log in. Next part is what are they able to access? So what are the permissions they have, and which application should they be able to access, or which data should they be able to read or write. Last but not least is auditing. So now you have all your needs together, but you want to know which user did what at what time. So this is really helpful as soon as you do have, for example, an incident and you want to have a look, or your data had some problems, so you can have a look what the problem was and which user did some changes or something else. So we can already see there is a lot more than only the 2 input fields and the button. And I would say most of the people are absolutely aware that it is an absolute critical part in the cybersecurity. So you do probably not want to be the headline in the news where you can read about your company that had some data breaches. So it is really important to make these parts as secure as possible. I saw there already came in a question.
Yeah, I think it was on the username password piece. You mentioned that was a good place to get started. The question is, we only need username and password. Do you recommend building or buying?
So it's hard to say. I would always recommend building your own solution, buying your own, a solution. But if you just start from scratch with username password, that's a pretty easy start, and you probably do have some SDKs in your frameworks and you can start pretty fast. But this is probably the current need you do have right now, and you should have a big focus on what you will need in the future. Username password is one part, but then you maybe have some more customers in the future and they say, okay, but I need multi-factor, or I need my Azure AD connected. So maybe something you should consider. Most of the time, it will not stay just username and password. I think most of the people are already aware that password is not the most secure authentication method. There have been more standards like passkeys, for example, that could help to make it more your solution more secure. So it's hard to tell right now just from that those needs, but I would say have a look at what else you will need in the future. Okay. Why is identity and access management so important? So you do want to protect your data from unauthorized access, and this is probably the most critical part. You do not want to leak any of your data, because this could result in any data breaches, potential financial loss, because you do have some damage, and last but not least, also reputation damage. So you probably already have read some news about companies that did have some data breaches, and that will always stick in the minds of the people reading about it. So it's really important to also have those parts in mind when you're choosing your solution. Then there's also some compliance regulatories like GDPR, and identity and access management just helps you to get those regulatories into your whole system and make it easier for you. And the last point is you can reduce your operational costs. So if you do have different applications, they all do have different user management. There's a lot to do for you when you have to manage all of those. If you can put this in one system and use it everywhere, it is easier for you to manage. Also, you do have less maintenance of costs, as you do not have to operate everything, and less implementation costs, as you do not have in every solution something to change. I want to give some examples about what authentication could look like in different use cases. So we can see on the left side, we do have 3 applications and they do have all different logins. So for example, Okta or Google login or GitHub login. These are all providers that can be used by different users to log into applications. But for you as an application builder or manager, it's really hard to differ which application does need what and to manage all of those. With an identity and access management solution, you get all of this together. So here we see on the right side, Zitadel in the middle. Zitadel has connected all those identity providers. So you can just choose which ones you want to configure based on the needs you have and your requirements. You can even choose for which organizations you do want to have those. And then you are just ready to go. It also helps to get all your user data to one point. So if there is something or you want to track who did an authentication in which application, you do have all of this centralized and have a look in Zitadel, and you do not need to have a look in all of those providers. I also want to give some background about what it means to implement something like this. So when we look at Zitadel, the time it took us to implement all of the groundwork, this means like implementing the standards, implementing different identity providers, being able to do settings for your system for different organizations, took us about 200 hours of groundwork. And then there is each identity provider, we calculate about 2 to 3 days to add another provider. This is also really dependent on the provider you need, of course, as most of those say they rely on standards like OpenID Connect, but most of them do not fully rely on those or are not fully compliant. So it's hard to find out where you have to change some parts. I also can give some background about like issue reports that we have. The issue reports in Zitadel does mean this could be a bug report, improvement requests, or any feature requests regarding those identity providers. So we do have at the moment around 20 open issues. So this should give you a little background about it's not finished when you have implemented the first draft. As soon as you start and you're going live, you will get some feedback from your customers. You should add some improvements. You do have different use cases. So there's more and more to add to those features. And this leads me to a second and really important part. So multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy is probably not the first thing you think about when you build your authentication solution. But I can tell you it's really hard to get it in if you have to add it later on. So this is something you should really think about when you start. Do you only have a B2C use case, or is it probably possible that you also want to have B2B use cases in the future? As soon as you have B2B use cases, this adds some more complexity to the whole system. And I can shine some light on how Zitadel does that. So for example, in Zitadel, we do have different organizations. You have your own organization where you configure your applications and projects. You do have your employees in there, and then you can add some more organizations for your customers. Then you can grant these projects to your customers and they are able to self-manage. So they are able to invite other users to their organization. They are able to set up their own SSO provider. They can manage access rights for their users and manage all the security policies and branding. So this means, for example, a customer can configure how long should a password be. Do I even want to have passwords, or do I only want them to be able to log in with Azure AD? And this is something that is really important as soon as you want to scale. Especially at the beginning, you probably do have less customers and it's easy for you to manage for them. But as soon as you grow, you want to give them the possibility to manage everything by themselves and have all these flexibilities to do these configurations in the needs of what they have. Let's get to some decision factors that you probably need to consider when you choose if you want to build your solution or if you want to buy something. So first of all, and I already focused on that a little bit before, is your business requirements. Make sure that you know what you need before you start, and also what you probably need in the future. Even if you want to start small with only one application and you want to add more applications in the future and they might have different needs, do have a look at those requirements as well. With that, I mean, do you need like only username, password? Do you need multi-factors? What kind of multi-factors do you need? Do you need pass keys and social logins? Do you have a B2B use case or a B2C use case? What do you need to be able to configure or manage? How much customization possibilities do you need? All those requirements are really important to know before you even start, as it can lead to a lot of cost, especially when you build your own solution, that you start small, but then you see that you have to implement a lot more in the future, or maybe things that you didn't see at the beginning. Of course, there's the budget you have. This also requires a little bit of, do you have in-house resources that could build something? Then, of course, you should also take into account that those resources also cost mostly time. You do not need to buy a solution in that case, but this requires really the decision for the budget. And then the next point is security, and it is coupled to the technical expertise and know-how. So if you do want to build your own solution, make sure you do have the knowledge about all the security topics. You do want to make sure that your solution is secure and that no user that should not be accessing any data is not able to do that. So make sure to have a look how many people do you have in your company that can build a solution and can also provide support if needed. Last but not least is the maintenance part, and that's mostly a part that gets forgotten. So you start building your solution, you have it ready, and now you need to deploy it to production. And there it is where the maintenance part starts. You do have some bug fixes, feature improvements that you need to work on, but you do also want to make it available almost at every time. We already found out that identity and access management is a critical part. If that application goes down, you will not be able, or your customers are not able to log into your application. And that's probably the worst case that can happen. So you do need to have a look at the uptime. Are there some interruptions? Do we have some downtime? Monitor all that. Have a look at the latency. If there's a problem, have a look at what you have to do and maintain the whole operational costs. And of course, there is also things like DDoS attacks you want to mitigate, and have a look that no one else can get into your system that should not be. We are now getting to the pros and cons of building your own solution. So on the one side, we have, of course, that you get absolutely control over the features you have in your solution if you build it yourself. You can tailor all the business requirements as you need them and implement all the custom flows that you need. And the second or the third point is the potential cost savings. So if you start by yourself, you build your own solution, You do not have to pay a provider or a service that you want to use and integrate into your system. Of course, there is the work you need to do and the implementation cost, but it's not money you give to an external service. On the other side, we do have like the significant upfront investment, and with that is mostly meant the implementation work you have to do. If you're relying on a existing provider and they do rely on standards like OIDC, there are tons of plugins, SDKs you can use for every framework to start pretty fast. If you do build your own solution, you will have some upfront investment to implement what you need to be able to put that into your application. Also, the technical expertise is something that might be a problem. Not every company does have a lot of knowledge about identities, about security, and this is something that should really be focused on when you build your own solution as well. And the last point is that you need to keep up with the standards and the security requirements you do have and that come up constantly. So there will always be some new standards, some new password hashes or whatever, and you should be up to date with all of those standards and know what is going on at the moment, so you can ensure that your application is as secure as possible. I do want to give you some example of customers that we have seen already. So, or use cases that we see often when they ask us for what our solution is capable of or whether we should build or buy. So yeah, you normally start with a username, password, and as I already told before, you probably do have that integrated pretty fast. Most frameworks do have something built in that you can manage users pretty easy and also username, password. But then you maybe get some more customers, bigger customers, you start to scale and you start to grow with your company and you do have some more needs. So the first customer might come to you and tells you, okay, but I really need multi-factor authentication and I do want to enforce that on my users. Or they say, okay, I already have my Azure AD and I want to connect this because I already manage all of my users in there and I do not want to manage duplicate users. So I want to be able to connect that. So you might think at the beginning that you only need a minimum of features, but there are probably more than that in the future. If we have a look again at our GitHub repository, we have at the moment around 170 issues that rely to features or new features or improvement requests. So that's no bug fixes or documentation or questions. That's only new feature requests. So you can already think of what it means to implement such a solution. You will never stop when you have it published in the first time. There are more and more features you want to integrate and you can integrate. So we always have thousands of ideas about what we want to do and have to prioritize what we want to do next. We get to the pros and cons of buying a solution. Buying a solution gives you the pro that you mostly rely on the newest standards. So I already touched the topic of OIDC and SAML. Those are standards that can be used to authenticate some users. And this really helps when you want to integrate with a solution. These are proven security standards. You know that they work, they are secure, and they are easy. You do have a lot of plugins mostly or SDKs to integrate as easy as possible. Also, if there are new standards, they will most likely be implemented in the existing identity and access management solutions. Maybe it takes some time till it is established and everyone knows, okay, this is a standard we really want to rely on, and then they will start integrating. But mostly you can wait for those standards to be implemented. Second part is you do have security proven features, and most of the time those applications also have pen tests. I already talked about you do not want to get or you do not want to be the headline in the news about your data breaches. And for a security company, I think that's even worse. So we do want to make sure that our product is as secure as possible and that you do not lose any of your data or do have any data breaches. So we do regular pen tests and make sure we rely on the most secure standards. Then you do not have the development and maintenance costs. Of course, you do need a little bit of development to be able to integrate to those solutions. You need to be able to configure everything as you need. But if you do have a cloud solution, for example, you can just set up your account and start straight away with integrating, and there's no need of upfront development. And last but not least is the support and expertise from vendors. So if you do have any problems with your product, with your data or the security, you can call a support and get some expertise about what you should do or about what the problem is. This is especially important if you're running in production and something goes down for whatever reason, that you do have someone in the background where you can rely on, and that helps you get it up to running as fast as possible. On the other side, we have limited flexibility in customizations. So if you do have really specific business requirements or custom flows that you do want to build, they are probably not out of the box in the solutions. And the second part is the vendor lock-in. So, of course, I already told you, you should have a look at your requirements and choose the best solution for you. And as soon as you have decided on that solution, you will probably rely on that for a little while. On the other hand, if you really focus on integrating with the current standards like OIDC, you will not have as many problems to choose another vendor or to switch to another vendor. Just the migration parts, of course, these costs will be there, but changing the solution is possible if you try to rely on the standards. I also want to give you some examples here, what we already have seen. So it's mostly about the customization possibilities. So we already heard sometimes that, for example, they do not want to have username password on different screens. That's how we built our login flow within Zitadel. And this does have some security requirements in the background, because normally if the user types in the username, you only then know what kind of authentication mechanisms they need. So we have that split up, but a lot of customers do want to have those on the same screen. So we just started adding our own session APIs, so to give the customers the flexibility about everything they want to build. Now they are able to build their own login using our APIs and customize everything to their needs. So with that, I just want to show that if you have a look what you need at the beginning and have a look what the solution provides, you can figure out if you can build everything that you need. Maybe with some customization possibilities, maybe you do have to implement a little bit by yourself, but you are able to do it with the solution. We are already coming to the last of the slides, and this should show you a little bit about a real world scenario. So we do have a customer called Open Systems. They did have their own authentication solution and had a look at different providers to find out if it's easier for them to buy an IAM rather than build their own authentication. One focus they really had when searching for a solution was the possibility of different identity providers, such as Azure AD, Okta, or Auth0, because they do have about 200 customers and all of them do use different identity providers. And it was really important for them to make those processes as easy as possible, also for the onboarding. We can see here that they could reduce the onboarding of their customers from about 24 hours to 15 minutes. And that's coming back to the possibility of being able to configure everything in Zitadel itself, being able to make policies for each customer and just have to configure a minimal configuration based on the defaults they have already configured. This also gave them time internally because they could free up resources that were previously bound to technical depths of their own solution and that had to support a lot in this current or the old authentication solution. So they had the possibility to use those resources for other important work. What is also good to mention at this point, Open Systems did start with a basic use case. They started with administration users, and now they are adding more and more parts to Zitadel. So next case will be end users of their customers, and then they will also need some machine authentication. And here coming back to the point I already mentioned, it is important to look into the future. If they wouldn't have thought about those use cases as well, they might have chosen a solution that is not capable of machine-to-machine communication, but that's something they need in the second step of the implementation. We are already at the end of this webinar, and before we start with the Q&A, I quickly want to let you know that here is a QR code for the feedback formula. It would be really great to get your feedback about the webinar, about the topic and how you'd liked it, just to ensure that we can improve us for future webinars. Also have in mind that the first participants or the first 5 participants who will give us the feedback will get a DoorDash voucher. And now we can go into the Q&A session.
So we have another question. Fabi says, how to choose which auth provider to use. So what are some, I guess, what are some pieces to look at for which auth provider to use?
Yes, that's a good question. So I think you're already at the point where you probably decided to not build your own solution and go with an auth provider. I would recommend pointing out your maybe 3 most important use cases and test the solution that you would like to have a look at. If you can build those 3 most important use cases, that's already a good point. I think there are a lot of solutions out there that provide you with a lot of value. I also think that like the basic stuff, all of them can do. So you do not need to check if you can manage your users. But if you do have some critical use cases that are specific to your company, do have a look at those and make sure that you can build them with the solution you need.
Awesome. Thank you. We have another one. What was the hardest feature for you to build?
That's a good question. as I'm not building a lot of features anymore, probably engineers could give here better answers. But from my perspective, I think the whole B2B use case, making sure that organizations can grant some grants to other organizations and kind of all those delegated access management parts. That's also kind of the background we had, like when we started with Citadel, we were working, or previously we were working at the company where we had exactly that use case. We didn't have the need for B2B in an authentication solution, and we actually didn't want to build it by ourselves, but at that point we couldn't find a solution. So that's why we started with Citadel. And I think till we got to the point to figure out how that should be implemented, that it can cover most of the use cases from customers, that was kind of the hardest point.
Okay. All right. Any other questions out there? Going once, going twice. Oh, we do have another one. So why should I choose Zitadel over other solutions?
I'm probably getting back to the same points as I already mentioned, but to shine some light on other points, what we do is we do have the flexibility of using our cloud or do self-hosting. And I think that's kind of a unique selling point. It's also possible that you, for example, do your test environment in our cloud solution, that you don't have to manage everything by yourself, and you have your production on your self-hosting because you do have more needs on that end, for example, that it should be hosted in a specific country or in your own data center or whatever you need. So I think that's a big plus we have. Also, that you can switch between those. So you start with self-hosting, and then you see, okay, no, I don't want to manage everything by myself. It's too much work. So I want to go into the cloud. This can be done with Citadel. The second part is, of course, like the B2B part that I already mentioned with the delegated access management. I really think this is a unique selling point we have, especially with the self-management possibilities for your customers or your business customers. So they do not have to, or you do not have to build that for each of your customers again and again. So you just get it out of the box with Citadel. I can see that there are other solutions that now start or already have started with B2B use cases. But I think the main difference is that that was our main focus when we started. So it is really built on that and easy doable. And the last part is that we are aiming for a platform approach, so that we have everything within Citadel. So we have authentication, we have permission management, we do have a hosted login, you do get a console to manage everything. You get like all those things out of the box. And with our customization possibilities like the actions, you are able to build almost all workflows you need or all customizations that you need.
So what are the challenges of Zitadel's self-hosted implementation?
I'm not 100% sure if I understand the question. Is it regarding what our challenges were, or is it about what your challenges are when you want to self-host Citadel? I can try to answer what I understand. So Yeah, I probably think what are the challenges of using Citadel self-hosted. So I think the biggest challenge generally is self-hosting and identity and access management. Being aware what kind of scalabilities do you have and how many users you need to be able to manage and what capabilities you do have, and ensure that your system as you host it is able to do that. We do have a cloud native approach with Citadel, so it should be pretty easy to get up and running with your first parts. Of course, we do have some challenges regarding, I would say, multi-instance approach. So basically, as we are open source, we do have exactly the same product in our cloud as we do have for our open source and self-hosting customers. And this means in our cloud, we do need the possibility to manage different instances, as each customer does get its own instance. And this is also something we provide for you as a self-hosting customer. So you can, for example, run for your staging, your production and testing, for example, or development. And this is easy to get started with your first instance, but as soon as you need to be able to configure all of those, it can be a challenge. And we are absolutely aware that we for sure should improve the documentation on that part and also try to guide you as best as possible on those possibilities.
We got another one here. Is there any advantage on choosing an open source IDP over closed?
I would say yes, absolutely. But it also depends on your needs. So first of all, if it's open source, you do have a lot of feedback from community mostly. So what we can see from our perspective, as soon as we do release a new candidate or release candidate, it gets tested pretty fast by the community, even if we do not have a proper release yet. So we get a lot of feedback directly after we have implemented a new feature. Also, if you do have some needs, and that is not the prioritization of the product itself, you could implement the feature by yourself. Of course, it does need to, or the product team or we need to be able to say, okay, yes, that's a feature we actually love and we would love to see within Citadel, but we just do not have the time yet, or not at the moment, maybe in the future, to build it by ourselves. So you can implement a feature and send your pull request and do what you need. So it gives you additional advantage in your customization or features that you miss in a specific solution. Also, I can think of that it might get tested a little bit better by the community, or they can have a look at the code and see if there's something going wrong or like that. So we also get some security bug feedback. And this is really valuable for us as well, to ensure that if we do have some bugs, and we all know each application does have some bugs somewhere, that we get those feedback pretty fast and can fix it as fast as possible.
Okay. Thank you, Fabi, for those answers. Any other questions out there before we wrap things up? Okay. So, yeah, Fabi, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, everyone who was able to join the call. again, to point you back to the QR code for feedback, it really drives what we're going to be able to present and how we present that. So your feedback is super important to us. If you don't mind taking the time to provide that. Otherwise, I hope that everyone has a wonderful day and join us next time.